So welcome to the third in a series of monthly webinars from Away Home Canada designed to increase knowledge and capacity on youth homelessness community planning. Our focus today is the role of Ontario service managers in community planning to end youth homelessness. My name is Mary Jane McKitterick, and I am the Community Planning Manager with Away Home. My preferred pronouns are she and her. I'll have to put the slide. There we go. I would like to take this time to thank the Government of Ontario for their generous support of this webinar series and their commitment to increasing the capacity of communities to prevent and end youth homelessness. I would also like to acknowledge that this series is in partnership with OMSSA, the Ontario Municipal Social Services Association, and the COH, the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. A special thank you to Oksana Rudenko from the COH today for all her support in setting up and running of these webinars. Away Home Canada is a national coalition dedicated to preventing and ending youth homelessness. We have a lot of details about our coalition, partners, and work in the first two that were presented in the first two webinars in this series and on our website. So I'm not going to repeat too much of that here, but I do encourage you to visit our website to review the webinar 1 and 2 and our website for more information. Today, I'm really pleased that our presenters are as follows. Dr. Alina Turner, among her many qualifications, Dr. Turner is a leading homelessness researcher and is a fellow at the School of Public Policy from the University of Calgary. She supports a variety of organizations to support human service system planning and integration, including plans to end homelessness and transitions to housing first. Dr. Turner provides valuable content expertise to Away Home. Amanda Buchnea is the Away Home Government Relations Officer. Wonderful Amanda has been indispensable to the Away Home Secretariat since she joined us last year. She's brought her strong understanding of government policy to our community planning work and is just completing her Master's in Public Policy at the U of T. We are all very much looking forward to April when she will join us full-time. Myself, I am the Community Planning Manager with Away Home. I've been working directly with communities to develop youth homelessness community plans since we began this work back in 2012. My role this year focuses on developing a community of practice for community planning in Ontario and then scaling that up across Canada. So our agenda today, we're going to begin. I'll just begin with by providing information about our community planning webinar series and then briefly touch on the current opportunities for this work in Ontario. Amanda will provide you with some information about her work helping Away Home to map out community readiness across the province. Dr. Turner will take us through the main discussion on potential roles for Ontario service managers and community planning. And then following that, we will run a town hall to support a more interactive webinar. We are providing a lot of content today, so this is where you can ask questions using the chat box or your phone lines. And we have some guiding questions for that. Oksana, did you want to add anything else about the town hall process here, or wait till later?
Well, I can just give a brief overview that everyone will have a chance to participate in the town hall using the telephone connection. So if you haven't logged into the phone line, make sure you do so. You can click on the phone icon at the top on the main navigation, and that will give you the numbers to call in. And if you could just mute your line as you're logging in, that would be great. Thank you.
Right. And there's something about raising hands. Do we want to talk about that later, or is that near
the end? Because we have about 37 participants, it might be a bit distracting if we all are speaking at the same time. So if you did want to speak during the town hall, if you could raise your hand, and then we'll call your name out, and then you can contribute your comment or question then.
Great. Okay. So when we can go through that again maybe too near the end. Okay. So fantastic. Thank you so much. So I'm just going to just do a little bit of a review about our webinar series and where we are with that right now. It's a year-long series, and we're doing one per month. It is organized into two phases. Phase 1 is designed to provide the fundamentals in community planning and helps to build out our community planning toolkit. So these webinars build on one another and form a full curriculum. Since they are recorded, folks at different stages of the process within their own communities or across communities can quickly reach the same level or familiarity with concepts, tools, and resources. So all the webinars are recorded and hosted on our website. That seems to be always the big question. The link is at the top of this slide. You can see it there. But Oksana has also provided it under the web links list on the top right hand of your screen. But you can also visit us at Away Home and navigate to the community planning section. And our webinars are all on YouTube as well. So phase 1 is composed of 3 webinars. The first is the Community Planning 101. That was in January. Then we had a second on collective impact in youth homelessness last month in February. And webinar 3 is today, and that is designed specifically to support Ontario service managers and their communities. But at the same time, there's a lot of value for any community anywhere that wants to find ways for community and local governments to work closely together. It's also about an appreciation for the unique role, though, that service managers play in Ontario and the structure that they work within, and the potential that they have to help us, so that you folks have us, to help us move further, faster, to prevent and end youth homelessness. So this is kind of what our phase 2 is starting to look like. We will dig deeper into each topic, and there's a list of the ones we have now. Of course, we'll have much more information going forward. I did want to put the data and enumeration and shared measurement into red because we've had increased interest, and there has been a recent service directive from the Ontario government on that topic. So we are developing a webinar for this purpose, and it will be in April or May. Not 100% sure. I'm hoping for April to support this work. So please stay tuned for that. Then in the following months, we'll have webinars on, again, 1 per month, role of funders, on systems integration, government policy, youth collaboration, regional planning, some early wins, and how to achieve early wins, and then a few others as well that we're developing. So we'll dig deeper into these topics, and we really look forward to seeing you there. One of the purpose of today's town hall, though, is as we address some of your questions, we'll get more ideas of how we can contextualize each of these new webinars and maybe add a few that we haven't thought of yet. So we really appreciate your participation today. So just really briefly about the Ontario context and the growing opportunity and interest that's happening right now, and why we're sort of beginning with Ontario to do this work. There is a concerted effort to work across the province. There's a lot of opportunity for communities to come together and share learning and work more closely with the provincial government. But also, I think it's worth mentioning that the federal budget this month or this week presented a lot of potential there that we can strategize and work together with government partners around. So that'll be that's coming up. One thing, I think maybe some of you have seen this one before, but it's worth repeating that in response to the Government of Ontario's commitment to ending homelessness through the poverty reduction strategy, the expert advisory panel on homelessness identified that youth homelessness was one of the 4 priorities. The others, of course, being chronic homelessness, Indigenous homelessness, and any homelessness following a transition from a provincially funded institution or service system. So we have additional supports and resources, and it's worth sort of running through some of these one more time as well to support the shift that's going on and the energy that's happening in Ontario. So our Away Home team is developing the community of practice and receiving a lot of support from the Ontario government to do that. So we're here to support you. We have our workspace on the Homeless Hub that you can join, but we're also going to create a service manager space coming up in the summer so that you'll have your own place to have conversations. In terms of funding opportunities, the McConnell Foundation and the Province of Ontario support the UCI, which is a support for all youth initiatives, but youth homelessness has fallen in there as well, and we work with communities that are both working with Away Home communities, but are also working on the UCI. We encourage you to explore that. The Trillium Collective Impact Granting Stream is also out there for that reason. But in September, we're going to be holding a planning institute hosted by Away Home, but also supported with support from the Ontario government. We don't have the exact dates yet, but please stay tuned. I'll be sending you information about that. And then finally, we have a fantastic Youth Homelessness Conference coming up in February in Ottawa. And the link is to the Coming Up Together conference is to your right. One thing you might note, though, is that there is a call for proposals for May the 1st for that conference. And you'll be hearing more information about that, but it's all on that website, too. So let's see. Oh yes, and so there are several communities though that are already interested in or working on youth homelessness plans, and many of you may have seen this map before, but it's definitely worth seeing the growing numbers of communities that are interested, and that also the significant number of folks who are on these webinars. So there really is that energy, and we just want to really emphasize that here, and that we at Away Home are committed to supporting this. So it is my great pleasure to pass the baton, the phone, over to Amanda and ask her to talk about her work to map community readiness to engage youth homelessness planning. Amanda?
Great. Thanks, Mary Jane, and hi, everyone. As Mary Jane said, my name is Amanda Buchnea, and I'm the Government Relations Officer here at Away Home. I'm going to briefly go through some of the considerations around community readiness for youth homelessness community planning. Over the summer months last year, I spent some time looking at each of Ontario's service managers and DSABs to see if, from an outsider's perspective, I could determine the level of readiness of individual communities and Ontario as a whole for partnering with Away Home to do some more intensive community planning work around youth homelessness. And since that project, Away Home has gone on to team up with OMSSA, and this webinar series is a product of that. And that's in order to get any or all service managers up to speed on youth homelessness community planning and disseminate knowledge and tools that can help communities at a broader level than just working community, which is what we've been doing for a while now. Admittedly, there are a number of limitations to the approach that I took, but by no means is this a replacement to making those in-person connections and having communities share their own experiences and perspectives on the work that they're doing. And in fact, from the process that I underwent through the summer, while I did get a better big picture understanding of community readiness in Ontario, I was left with a few more questions than when I started. And I think that's a positive thing, because if I have these questions, perhaps other communities themselves need the opportunity to talk through what readiness is and how you know you're there. So what I'll do is briefly share what I was looking for in terms of readiness from my perspective, and and then go into a little more specific detail around what might be helpful for service managers to consider as they embark on their own readiness assessments. So from the start, it was obvious that while adequate ability to fund efforts is important, we didn't want to just focus on communities that have the capacity to fund community planning efforts, because that could quickly preclude service managers, and in particular DSABs, that might have more limited resources than others. And that's not ideal for developing tools that we want to be flexible to adapt to different contexts, circumstances, and opportunities that might come up in urban, rural, or northern areas. So readiness is a lot more than just financial capacity. So I started by looking at each of the 47 communities' housing and homelessness 10-year plans, just to see if within these products there were indications of an understanding of the issues from a systemic or a systems perspective, and what considerations were given to youth in particular. Many of the plans did discuss the available services and areas of need for youth, some in greater depth, and some had more of the hallmarks of a plan rather than a status report. And some plans did a really good job of relaying information on the relationship between the service provider and service managers. I also took a look, or took into consideration the fact that, as the previous slide shows, Away Home has been approached by a number of communities in the last couple of years about collaborating around community planning efforts, and typically these communities did have a pretty solid understanding of their readiness, and when after I completed the assessment, it shows that the communities that had were really ones that had a higher readiness. So I looked for, I was also looking at other opportunities and indicators, such as the possible leaders that could emerge from those communities, whether they receive HPS funding, and whether they might be a part of the Vibrant Communities Canada, have a local United Way chapter, what kind of youth-serving organizations were present in the community, and all this is just to kind of create a bigger picture from our perspective of what's going on at the community level and where there's some opportunities that we can really make some impact. Those that typically had lower readiness, it was more because they didn't really show prominent or clear concentrated effort around youth housing and homelessness or service integration. But it's clear that across the province there's high interest in improving outcomes for youth, and that there's a great deal of enthusiasm, which is evident in this new partnership with OMSSA. And so with this in mind, now we can kind of look at what service managers might be considering from their perspective in terms of readiness. So at the heart of understanding readiness, it's not necessarily, we don't necessarily start from the question of, is my community ready? That kind of comes later. The first thing we need to be asking ourselves is, what does my community need to be ready for? In the context of youth homelessness community planning work and perhaps other strategic planning work on complex issues that are facing your community, there are a few things that you should consider when it comes to assessing readiness. So the first is readiness for collective impact. And since the last webinar in our series was dedicated to this topic, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth, but if you can recall, if you were in that webinar, there are 3 preconditions for collective impact work that can act as indicators for community readiness. The first is having influential leaders that are able to champion your cause to multiple players and sectors that touch on the issue. The second is having a sense of urgency around the issue. And the third is having adequate resources, which again aren't just financial, but potentially personnel, time, space, and all the many resources that can enhance this planning process. The second is readiness for systems-level thinking and planning. And I think the advantage of having service managers lead or be in some way involved in the community planning process is that they generally get systems thinking and understand the high-level shared vision that's uniting the community's work. You're able to convene the major players because you know who they are and how they can fit into the planning process. And this is invaluable to community planning on youth homelessness because it can be difficult for frontline service delivery organizations to really take a step back and see the bigger picture when most of their work is done on an individual organizational level that's very close to the issue. Third, in terms of readiness, is readiness to recognize what isn't working well in your community. And that can be challenging sometimes and uncomfortable because you can be confronted with the realization that something isn't working well for youth in your community. But if we're not really willing to or afraid to take a hard look at our systems and programs and ask if they're really producing the positive outcomes for youth that we want, it can potentially prevent us from taking the next step of collecting data and doing proper program evaluation because we're afraid of the outcomes. And closely related to this is the desire to change in order to improve outcomes for youth. So willingness to change is often the first step in making progress on any particular issue. Additionally, having strong leadership in your community that's able to and ready to take on the process of change management in order to bring all the other players alongside and help them understand why changes are necessary and how they can adapt to this new program or policy or whatever it is that you're needing to change and implement. You should also consider whether your community is ready to move forward with and lead innovative and creative solutions to the challenges around youth homelessness. Acknowledging that the business as usual approach might not be working anymore and sometimes fundamental changes will need to be made. This invites an opportunity to innovate and make approaches more strategic, evidence-based, and tailored to your community's context. And finally, if your community is changing its approach and using new innovative solutions, you should be ready to carefully document your process and engage in evaluation that can be shared and disseminated with other communities so they can learn from the positive work that you're doing. If we really want to create broader social change and systemic change on youth homelessness, this will only happen if we're able to share our knowledge and best practices for other communities to replicate or adapt to fit their own context. So this is just a very brief outline of community readiness. These are some considerations that you can take when you're starting to look at what your own community might be ready for. But for more information on some actual community readiness assessment tools, you can look into the Youth Homelessness Community Planning Toolkit for more information there.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. That was terrific. Now I would like to ask Dr. Turner to take us into the main part of the webinar. And as we said, following her discussion, we will open the phone lines for our town hall, and you'll be able to ask questions or make comments using your phone or the chat box. Take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, and welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us. So my name is Alina, even though everybody says Dr. Turner, it still feels weird. So just Alina is perfect for me, and my preferred pronouns are she and her. So I'm sure you've all seen the map of service managers before. If you haven't, here's another visual reminder of the 47 various regions that are considered as part of the 47 service manager network. So that's really who this presentation is tailored for. But we're also hoping that if you're not a service manager or you have a community entity role, this might also be of relevance as well. So a couple of pieces to start out with, and the first is really generally the service manager roles in addressing homelessness, and a lot of this comes from some of the documentation from the province of Ontario around the accountabilities of service managers in their various local contexts. And again, I'm sure you know all this, but just to make sure we're all on the same page. So you obviously have a key role to play in the policies that promote affordable housing development, the local vision around local housing and homelessness plans. So obviously you're already accountable for developing strategic plans around homelessness and affordable housing. So youth planning has to fit and has to align with that general work around homelessness and affordable housing. The other piece is around your role in coordinating housing funding in the community and your administration role vis-a-vis these programs. So you have a key performance management or contract management role that you need to manage alongside anything you take on in collective impact, and that can present opportunities and challenges as we'll get into in more detail. The social housing portfolio, again, comes under service manager roles as well, alongside the ongoing reporting and trend analysis with respect to homelessness and affordable housing in the local community. You also, or some of you, deliver Ontario Works and municipally administered child care services and have a key role to play in terms of human service integration, depending on the various portfolios that come under your accountabilities. And this also plays into the size of the service manager catchment area, let's call it that, because some of you are regionally dispersed and have to manage social housing portfolios in different communities, for instance, as well as service delivery for homeless programs, et cetera, not just in one particular locality. So there's also this regional tension that you need to manage around resource allocation that will obviously need to be accounted for as you consider youth homelessness work. The next slide, which, let's see if I have control of this. No, maybe Oksana, do you? Okay. No, I got it. So the service manager roles around ending homelessness. I thought about this and looked at what's actually happening on the ground, and it seems to fit under these two broad categories. One is where you lead the work, so you're the convener, you're the champion, and the other one where you're supporting partner in the planning work. So that again depends on who else is on the ground doing this work and already has exhibited an interest or capacity to take on youth homelessness strategic planning work. So in some cases, the United Ways are the conveners or take on that backbone function in community and have already done a lot of work around youth, so the youth homelessness piece naturally seems to fit with the work that they're already doing. So the important part around this is that there's not necessarily this right or wrong piece around whether you need to lead or you need to support. If there's already an emerging organization that has the legitimacy and capacity to lead the work and your role better fits as a supporter, then that's absolutely okay too. So I don't think there's any, restrictions around what your support looks like, right? So within your current capacity, you have to consider what else is happening on the ground and chime in certain contexts and kind of riff off what other organizations' leadership role might be in youth homelessness. But in cases where that is not happening, then you need to consider whether you want to step into that lead role, which obviously has pros and cons. So a couple of pieces that I'll go through in the rest of the presentation around the service manager roles in ending youth homelessness. And this just gives you a brief summary of, I guess, from my perspective, what those roles would be. One is in that funder performance manager role that we talked about around your service contracts and the delivery of services and housing in your community. The one is around plan supporter that I just talked about. System planner, we'll get into more depth around what this actually means. And planning lead is really to do with your taking on the planning work and leading it, and then the knowledge leader innovator. So all of these pieces you can do all together or at different times. They're not mutually exclusive. They're just buckets of activities that have some distinct features that we wanted to highlight for you. So in terms of the planning lead, as Amanda was already connecting with you on and has already given us a sense of community readiness, somebody has to take the lead in actually managing that community readiness assessment. So knowing who's who and who's going to take the work on and what the mood in the community and appetite for the work, that is absolutely a key role for somebody who's going to take the planning lead on youth homelessness for sure. The leadership role in terms of convening and supporting steering committee tables, for instance, to develop and implement youth plans is another key leadership role that could fit if the service manager was taking on the planning lead role, as well as the consulting and engagement activities that go into youth plan development and implementation. So again, somebody needs to be the face of implementation or the plan development, so that backbone support, but also champion in the community. So developing the actual plan and launching it to stakeholders, that's obviously a major piece of work that would require dedicated resources. And again, Amanda pointed these out in terms of, it's not just funding, it's also the actual staff time that goes into this work. The next piece is around the plan supporters. So like I said before, if there is another organization or a group of organizations via coalition locally that's taking on the overall leadership, then perhaps the SM can play in to this process as a member of the steering committee or member of the working groups. You can also connect the youth homelessness agenda with your HMIS or homelessness data management system, so making sure that adequate data is being provided during the planning process from your funded agencies and any coordinated access processes you might have in place. And again, that data is going to be critical to develop an accurate picture of youth homelessness in the area. And that's something that you might have at your fingertips as a funder of these services. The other piece is your role in promoting alignment of whatever this youth plan is going to look like with your broader local homelessness poverty plans or housing plans. So depending on what your community has already in place, you don't want to have the situation where your youth plan is going in one direction and doesn't speak to the broader homelessness strategy. And then vice versa, you want to ensure that updates of that homelessness strategy speak to the youth plan, and that is being part of the local priorities. The other piece is around your role and capacity to align diverse funding streams to meet community priorities and targets. So if you are a supporter of the youth plan, doing at least a scan of your investments to see where alignment is already occurring. So are you already funding Housing First programs for youth? If you're not, how many of the programs that you fund or housing units that you manage welcome youth, for instance, or are targeted towards this population and their services tailored based on best practices in terms of serving youth. So absolutely, there's a role for you to play in terms of your funding stream alignment with the plan. And then the ongoing reviews that youth plans during their implementation have to undergo, and you being part of those ongoing discussions and learning from implementation are going to be key and very welcome. The other piece is just your general championing of youth homelessness. So within your various networks of influence and just general networks and people and organizations that you connect with, ensuring that you speak to youth homelessness as a champion in those circles would obviously be another way that you can support the plan. So in terms of the funder performance manager role, and again, I'm going to speak from some of my experience as a funder in this, so I hope it aligns with what you're seeing on the ground as well. But I think one of the key challenges that we have as funders and performance managers is that we are managing diverse priorities in the community, and there's only enough resources to do so much. So it's a matter of figuring out where on the priority scale it fits for you to align your resources with youth homelessness priorities. In terms of the diverse funding streams and meeting community priorities and targets, as well as compliance and monitoring reporting requirements, that's another opportunity for you to take that on. The assurance of comprehensive outcomes measurement, program monitoring, and quality assurance, and ensuring that these are, again, aligned with youth homelessness is going to be key, as well as implementing service standards and programs within the systems that address youth homelessness from a broader perspective. So in terms of knowledge leadership, there's a lot of work that has been happening for you to be able to leverage best practices. So there's so many resources that are available around youth homelessness best practices that you can take a look at and then review those against any innovative programs and adaptations you might want to introduce in your funding portfolios as well. There are research and supports for the implementation of the youth plan and ensuring that these are refined in real time. Again, you likely have research capacity already in place, but is this necessarily aligned with the youth plan itself? The promising practices sharing at the regional, provincial, national levels. Again, Amanda mentioned this already, so there's certainly opportunity for you to be part of a broader network of service managers at the provincial and national levels to share your learnings and best practices for others to benefit from. So that's, again, the community of practice piece, and championing youth homelessness, again, capacity building initiatives. So in your role as a funder, you likely already provide training and technical assistance in the homeless serving sector that advances local priorities. So considering the youth aspect within those activities would be another way that you can promote innovation with respect to this issue. Around the system planner role, you have an opportunity here to perhaps consider the development of a youth homelessness serving system. So we'll get into more detail around what this means in practice. But the system planner role and the funder role are they're somewhat distinct yet integrated. So in many ways, the system planner organization often takes on the funding coordination as well. But in terms of organizing your homeless serving system and ensuring that the youth component of that system is organized and in place and working to maximum efficiency will be critical as well if this is something that you have an interest in. An integrated information system, again, I'm not sure what various communities are using, but if you have HIFIS or another type of system in place, having this in play and ensuring that data that's appropriate and aligned with your youth plan is going to be key. So things around gender identification, even capturing appropriate age categories and various risk factors that we know are associated with youth homelessness in your data and in your information system, and monitoring for this in real time is going to support this alignment with youth homelessness strategies as well. I mentioned the progress and strategic review on the plan as well as, and this is another key part of the system planner's work on an ongoing basis. So a couple of things about the successful system planner organizations. They generally lead system planning in the community, so they take on system mapping exercises, so whether they're funding the various services or not, they certainly take on the organization role of the various programs and housing initiatives in the community, and they aim to monitor the performance of the broader system on behalf of the community and various partners. So that also includes things around, obviously, integration strategies. So you can have data from shelters going into one spot and not consider how that's related into your Housing First programs. Your ability as a system planner and sometimes as a funder is to integrate those services at the frontline level. You also have an integration role with respect to your accountabilities for diverse funding streams. So for instance, managing rent subsidies as well as social housing as well as homelessness interventions gives you a wonderful opportunity at the kind of a regional level to ensure there's an integrated approach to homelessness as well as youth homelessness within that. So that is within your portfolio, but then you may, again, depending on your appetite for system planning work, want to take on integration with other public systems. So for instance, justice, child intervention services, etc. So those integration strategies obviously connect you to systems that are not necessarily within your control or within your funding streams. And that obviously requires new partnerships and ways of doing business that speak to the change management Amanda mentioned before as well. In youth homelessness work, though, that integration strategy work is absolutely essential to implementing the plan. So it's critical for whoever takes on the system planner role in the community. And again, the service manager could be doing this work, or they could be supportive of the system planner organization who does take the leadership in this area. I mentioned championing and supporting innovation, so I don't need to rehash that, but absolutely system planners have to review best practices on an ongoing basis against their current system and respond to needs in real time. So that's likely nothing new to you. I mentioned a little bit about service integration. I wanted to note that system planning, and especially following a housing first approach, and whether it's for youth or any other priority population, it's really a transformative process for your local service continuum to move from a program-by-program approach into a community-wide systems approach. And that's a way of organizing and delivering your homeless services to the appropriate needs of the locality and at the regional level. So that means that we're no longer working in isolation. We truly integrate as part of a greater whole, regardless of our funders or regardless of our agency prerogatives, for instance. So it's that whole role of the community to end homelessness and youth homelessness in this case. This often includes metrics and quality standards at the program and system levels, which we often miss. We often measure success only at the program or agency level and don't necessarily integrate our measures for success around these broader community priorities at that system level. And then that ongoing refinement from learnings and community planning, the information system that you have in play, and performance management processes, because obviously things change very quickly, and even something as routine, I guess, as new budgets coming down and major announcements being made will have to be accounted for in your strategic community planning work. So a little bit about the program building blocks that are part of a systems approach. So this is just to say that you already have pieces of this in play in the community. So you've got the emergency shelter, transitional housing, supportive housing, as well as some of the newer housing first interventions like rapid rehousing and ICM. Prevention, rent support, affordable housing you already do. Outreach is very common as well. Coordinated access is something that obviously is essential to this work, but may not necessarily exist in your community. It's still a key building block in creating a systems approach. Those of you in smaller rural centers will say that you may not have all these pieces in place, and that's an absolute reality for you. And then on top of that, ensuring that you have a parallel system for youth as well as the broader homeless community is again another challenge. So from my perspective and examples of good work happening across the country, I would say that there's absolutely ways of playing with these program building blocks to make them fit in your community. So some communities only have ICM, for instance, and the ICM takes clients of diverse family compositions, ages, and levels of acuity, but various staff might have expertise within that one program to deliver those tailored services. Similarly with housing, sometimes a community might not have the funds to deliver emergency shelter supports. So in that case, you might have an instance where you have to create a a home-based type of program that, again, has been more recently launched with host homes with respect to youth. So there's ways that you can work around your limitations at the community level to an extent, of course, because at the end of the day, resources are limited in rural centers. Housing and affordable housing are, again, a key challenge, especially if landlords are not willing to collaborate with you. So in those cases, you need to be very creative around what that looks like. So in some instances, a priority for a smaller community might be around capital purchases to develop supportive housing because they don't have the buy-in from private landlords to deliver the scattered site approach. So this is truly a map of functions of this system, but how it gets tailored at the community level depends very much on need as well as resources. So just to note that just because you don't have it and you need it doesn't mean you don't have a strategy to figure out a way to develop that function if it's a critical need for addressing the issues at your local level. The service integration piece I mentioned, so just a note around those systems that play in ending youth homelessness, and I mentioned children's services and housing as well as justice, but health and social assistance as well as your poverty reduction initiatives, you need to think about how those integrate and where alignment occurs, where mutual support and opportunities exist, and where sometimes there's in fact not necessarily alignment in what we need to do about that. It's also a note that service integration doesn't just happen at one level. So your frontline services, your frontline staff, so police, teachers, social workers and children's services, et cetera, are one level. And then you've got the organizational, the various managers and directors. The funders of these systems are very diverse in their expectations as well. And then the policy coordination and political will around these systems to ensure that the broader ending youth homelessness goal is met needs to be in place as well. And this is, again, where SMs can play a critical role. You likely can do quite a bit at the funder, organizational, and frontline levels, but you may need to exert more of an influence at the policy and political levels. However, knowing that you can find leverage points to move that forward, and there's definitely going to be more work that Away Home is going to do on delivering some more resources around the policy and political work that we need to do to end youth homelessness that service managers will have access to in future webinars. So stay tuned for that. Some practical integration considerations if you are looking at enhancing your work with these various systems, so especially justice or health, et cetera. Having some interest or a leverage point around a common target population. So if you know that everybody buys into youth at risk or ending youth homelessness, it makes integration conversations much easier if you can define the population that's of interest. That executive direction and buy-in, so it's one thing to work with the frontline staff, it's another one to have that direction flow from the top and from the bottom up. So thinking about how best to ensure that that's happening. And again, things you can do, things you may need to get others to do on your behalf. The committee coordination across integration initiatives. So we see lots of work happening now around complex clients. And in fact, it has sometimes complicated our work around homelessness because we now have to deal with not just the systems, but the various coordination tables that are trying to do integration work. So now we're at the point, a ridiculous stage where we need to integrate the integration initiatives, which is not the point. But again, it's making a note that might be happening in your community and being aware of these various pockets of integration efforts and ensuring that those are coordinated and not working at cross purposes. And believe me, there's lots of examples where they are. The funding alignment, again, like it's one thing for you to prioritize housing first and youth, but if your funders are not, or they're sending a different message to services, then it's very beneficial for a sit down or a funders table to ensure that common priorities are met and everybody knows what everybody else is doing. So a very simple communication thing that can go a long way. The performance management and information work to support coordinated care. So I know there's lots of privacy concerns around this, especially when you bring in various public systems into play. But at the same time, there's also great examples of work at the regional level between various health regions and homeless services as well as housing to deliver better integrated supports. So don't let the privacy piece stop you. It's part of your consideration, but it's not a reason not to integrate services for the greater client well-being. And then, of course, the training and capacity building to ensure your staff and the system staff are speaking the same language and working towards similar priorities, especially when they come from very different service cultures. That can go a long way in reducing some of the potential conflicts in delivering truly integrated services in the community. Okay, so I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to your comments. And I'll pass it to Oksana and Mary Jane to walk you through the town hall component.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful, and you packed a lot of information into a very few minutes. So I'm sure there are a lot of folks who want to ask some questions. We have opportunities to do so through your phone line, but we also welcome folks who feel like they want to type it out in their chat box. So what we've provided for you are some guiding questions that can help sort of stir some of your questions or comments. And so I'll just kind of run through them on this slide that's on your screen now, and then you can use them to sort of, foment your ideas. The first one is, where do you see your role in youth homelessness work currently? Where do you want to be? What are the challenges to getting for you? What are the challenges to getting for you? Yeah, okay. Sorry. What supports do you need? And what can Away Home do to support you? Another big one would be, what would success look like for you? We're always interested in that one. And what does service integration look like for you? How do you do system planning work, and where does ending youth homelessness fit within this work? So these are just guiding questions to help you think through where you want, but we've also shared a lot of content. So Oksana, is there anything else that we want to add to this process before folks start to chip in?
Yeah, so if you did want to speak, you can unmute your telephone line by pressing *7. And if you did want to add something via phone, if you could just please raise your hand, and then we'll call your name out, and then you can speak. And you can raise your hand by pressing on that little person with their hand raised up, and then we can see that. It looks like Mary Jane's raised her hand.
I wanted to try it out.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. I can't see it.
And additionally, you can always type in your question in the chat box or comment.
Great. So we'll just wait a couple minutes to get everyone, so everyone can get comfortable with the idea of where some of the questions they have.
It looks like Erica is typing something. And just in case you can't find the raise your hand button, if you want to just type your name into the chat and say, I'd like to speak now, that's also acceptable too.
So Erica's question is, can you speak a bit more about how to align existing initiatives and strategies and plans with the creation of a new youth plan? Good one. That's a big question. We could do a whole webinar just on that, couldn't we? Do you want to try stepping in there first? And Amanda,
yeah, sure.
As well? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I'm just thinking about this because I had to do this in Calgary when I was the community entity role there. So, the context there was that we had initially developed just a general 10-year plan to end homelessness, and then sure enough realized a couple of years into implementation that there were very distinct needs for youth that we just didn't necessarily do a good job in capturing in the initial strategy. So we came up with this idea of developing a Calgary plan to end youth homelessness. So the challenges that we had is that we already had a bigger plan in place that didn't really do a good job, like I said, around this population, and we didn't do a good job around Indigenous homelessness either, just to put that out there as well. So we recognized these deficits at that time. So our approach was to essentially take on the community planning work for youth to develop this youth plan, and then we did the same with Indigenous homelessness as well, actually. And then that actually led us to redo our first plan, our 10-year plan, right? So to ensure that there was alignment. And so the second version of the plan, the updated plan, which was done about halfway through after the first implementation period, actually included a subpopulation lens. So we would go through each of the priority subpopulations like youth or women, families with children, and then we would show that where that alignment was happening. So it did actually require us to kind of go back to the drawing board and start over once we went through the youth and Indigenous planning work, which is actually good because, like I said, it's part of our ongoing learning. It's part of that update and progress report and needs assessment. As your learnings get better, you should be updating your local plans. I'm not sure what plan out there has actually been implemented like over 10 years without any adjustments, and if it has, then you're probably doing something wrong because life changes very rapidly, and so should our strategies be living documents. So I think just having that approach is a welcome way of managing the integration of the youth plan within broader strategies. I think it worked fairly well. The other piece to consider is like if you can go back to the beginning and do it right the first time, which I'm not sure is possible, but let's say it is, then you could actually develop a bigger plan and speak to these subpopulations within it. So again, going to the Calgary example, and just because that's the one I was starting to talk to you about, they recently had yet another update of their plan, and within that, all these youth subpopulation priorities. So there's kind of plans within the plan, right? So there's different sections on these priority groups like immigrants, youth, people with disabilities, families, etc. So the content that would be a separate youth strategy is now just part of the bigger strategy. But again, like I said, it required us to redo that bigger plan.
And that's interesting too, because it was a slightly different point in time that Kingston's group working with the Mobilizing Local Capacity started to do their plan, but their 10-year homelessness municipal plan was sort of underway but not complete. So they were able to work with their service manager as well and integrate ask the city to leave the youth piece open, and so that the youth plan could be inserted. But then after, and that worked really well, but then there were always, conversations following that where, in terms of aligning the funding and how that would work, because there was sort of two processes and then bringing them together. But that was, I think, a community where that was very successful in aligning it, but it was in a different place too. They hadn't actually released the 10-year homelessness plan yet. It was still in its development stage, so they were able to incorporate this other piece. So that's great. Another sort of, Melanie too has asked for the age for youth that we're speaking about. We generally mean 16 to 24 at Away Home, but we also recognize that different jurisdictions and regions might vary across the country. So, so if anyone's from different parts of Canada on the call right now, they are There's different. It's also depending, the federal government has some different jurisdictional ages as well, and some of the youth programming around employment can go up to 30. So, but when at Away Home, we generally mean 16 to 24. Any hands raising?
No, but it looks like Marie Morrison has agreed. Marie, if you're on the phone line, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, it is like we're planning on so many different levels now, and not an excuse, but we're figuring out how within all the other planning and system change that we're doing, the youth piece fits in as we do change at sort of a program level across the system. So, you know, changing what's happening with emergency shelters across our system, changing what's happening with supportive housing across our system, changing what's happening with coordinated access. And then there's population-specific pieces. So we've worked on a full family service pathway, and we would love to get to the youth service pathway, but we're also so busy with some of those other changes. So, you know, and I don't know if it's just where your community's at and what it has energy for at that moment. We're challenged a bit with a lot of priorities in system change.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't look like there's any other raised hands at the moment. If anyone else wants to add something else, feel free to let us know by either raising your hand or just typing something into the chat box.
Okay, a few more people are typing into the chat box, so maybe that's our preferred method today. Erica's saying thank you. You're welcome, Erica. Yes, sorry, the slides will be available following this this webinar. We'll send them to you for those of you who are registered on this for this webinar, and then we'll put them on our website as well, permanently. And that was for Mike Hennessy. So if there's anyone out there who has ideas, has had time to think a little bit more about the content provided today, and has some ideas around future webinars, you know, I related some of the topics earlier, and we have some guiding questions now. But if there's something very specific that you want more, I know Marie's just talked about the challenges in the systems change, and definitely sort of that change management piece would make a great webinar coming up for our curriculum. I think that would be captured under that. But if there's anyone else who wants to recommend or has some things or issues, burning issues that are, you know, in your process right now that you'd like to say, hey, it would really help us if you could provide us with X or Y, this is a great opportunity for you to do that and for us to hear from you too. So. We also really want to mention that there is an appendix specifically for service managers in the toolkit, in our community planning toolkit on the Homeless Hub and on our website. That is Appendix A, and it's about, I think, about 8 pages, designed specifically to capture some of the work that we talked about today. So you might want to take a look at that if you haven't already. I know it's a lot of thinking around getting your heads around your local situation and what roles you want to play or could play, and talking it out with your community. So that's a big piece of it too, figuring out how things could move forward. You can see there's so many moving parts. It's really just trying to work with your community to align those parts and figure out how they would flow. So. more raised hands?
Nope, doesn't look like it. But if anyone can't locate the raise hand button, just type in your name in the chat box and say that you'd like to speak, and we can work on that.
Okay, so Valerie Watson, can you recommend an evidence-informed host homes program in a rural community? Evidence-informed, well, I guess you've probably all heard about the 360 Kids is starting with the, oh my gosh, what's it called? Got a blank. Their program up there, they've just started it. It'll come to me in a second, sorry. We also have a great program in Halton. In terms of evidence-informed, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I know they've been running it for a long time, so that's Bridging the Gap, and they do a wonderful host homes program down there in Halton, and I've been down to see that program, and it's actually, they leverage the CAS down there, so there's a lot of work done there. There's some excellent work being done out in Calgary. I don't know, Alina, could you do you have any more information on ORA or any of the other programs that they're talking about in Calgary around host homes? Because that is really
it's great. It's just that it's not rural, of course.
Yes,
so So the Boys and Girls Club out in Calgary do this program as well with funding from the community entity, which is the Calgary Homeless Foundation, and they actually tailor it to youth that identify as LGBTQ. So there's obviously enough of an issue here where you can even tailor a youth program even further. But like I said, it's not necessarily a rural program, so that's a bit of a challenge. However, I am quite certain the Homeless Hub has some best practices around host homes that we can share with you. So those might be a good guidance on developing these in smaller centers. The host homes program has been looked at in Canmore, which is a smaller center in Alberta as well, just because again it's a way of leveraging community housing that's already existing. So youth essentially would get access to a bedroom, and the house parents, let's call them, would get trained and screened, etc., for providing emergency supports. There is another program that's managed out of social services or child intervention. I guess in your case, it's the child welfare side of provincial funding through Salmon Arm. So Salmon Arm in British Columbia is a small center in the Okanagan as well, and they have had this in operation for many, many years. So again, it's where parents take on, like house parents take on the emergency sheltering services as opposed to creating an institutional response through a youth-specific shelter. So it does seem to have kind of a lower cost, obviously, because you're not building a capital, you don't have any of the zoning restrictions, etc., and you can leverage kind of the community will and volunteerism. So obviously there's some compensation that you can put into the program, but you can also recruit volunteer-based supports if in a rural center where those resources might not be possible. And in a way, it's also been criticized as a way of managing the problem. So just to be aware of that too, that ideally it's a permanent housing response or option, but recognizing that sometimes that interim support is also critical, especially for youth that are marginalized in an adult shelter system. So you want to have an alternative for them available. It's just what happens once they exit that house, that host home. Where do they go? Mm-hmm. So that exit planning piece and support for them is going to be critical. So
that's fantastic. And thank you, Gwen Potter-King, for filling in my mind blank there that I just had. The Night Stop program as being just starting up at 360 Kids. So I think we'll need to wait a little bit just to get some more evidence and some results from that program, but we're all very excited about that. So thank you, Gwen, for filling in the blank for me. Sometimes that happens. And Marie, again, asks, really appreciate that you are doing this work and the focus on the role of service managers. Is there an assessment tool available that speaks to where you are at in progress towards ending youth homelessness?
Yes, there is in the community planning toolkit. So I did one part of the assessment, which is assessing your community readiness around planning, and then another one is around implementation. So that one will help you figure out where you're at in terms of actually moving the needle on youth homelessness. Now, it doesn't take into account your actual number, so have you achieved functional zero, so to speak, around youth homelessness. But actually, I did do an adaptation of the functional zero definition on ending homelessness for Away Home. So that might be a good kind of segue for us to keep that as front and center, so that when we talk about ending youth homelessness, what does that actually mean in terms of indicators? So there is those two resources for you. So right away, you can take a look at the community readiness and implementation self-assessment. So there's some pointers there, and then the other pieces around functional and to homelessness. I know there's a paper on the general end of homelessness available, but we also tailored it towards youth. But I'm not sure Away Home has released it yet.
Yes, I think I'll check into that.
We'll follow up.
That would be great. Thank you for that. And Marie also follows up with would be interested in a webinar on host homes. So that would be great. Yes, there's a lot of energy around host homes right now, so we'll look into that for sure. There'll be some things coming out of the, I think, on the Homeless Hub, a toolkit for that as well, I think, at some point. So we'll work towards that.
Yep. Is there any other program types that you all might be interested in? I know there's, in the service manager survey, there was a lot of interest in hearing about promising program models as well. So host homes obviously is one. Transitional housing actually came up. So that's another one. So what's its role in ending homelessness? That's often a question we get all over. So not just in youth homelessness, but now that we're committing to ending homelessness, where do emergency shelters fit in that equation? What about transitional housing? What about outreach? So there's this whole piece around transforming your program models to align with the goal of ending homelessness. So we're not saying you don't need these program components. We're just saying that the way they operate might need to be rejigged in some cases. So there's interest in that I remember, as well as just the overall supportive housing models. So foyer housing, for instance, has come up, and that's actually a form of transitional housing, by the way. So there's, again, that alignment, and housing first for youth, of course. So if there is interest in kind of these program models, then let us know which, or if not all, are of particular interest to you.
Aja Peterson's asked, she says, sorry if it's, I'm not sure pronoun here, you spoke about some good examples of information sharing, data sharing practices to promote service integration. Can you let us know where to find those examples?
Well, I'm not sure they're necessarily written up, but I can tell you about them. So for instance, information management systems, so homeless management information systems that align all your programs into one database are great examples, and there's so many examples of effective HMISs. Unfortunately, a lot of them come from the U.S., so we're a little bit behind on this piece. But what they do is essentially use one web-based platform that unites all the various programs into one large, I guess, shared information system. So that's one way that service integration can happen very effectively at the system level, because now you have information, just basic stuff around who's actually using our system. You know, how many are we talking about in terms of unique clients? Because sometimes we don't even know how many unique clients we're all talking about, because we all have our own program level databases that we keep for funders, and then sometimes even at the agency level, those records are not necessarily merged. So just having that critical information about who's using it and for what end, and what impact are the services making, how are people traveling or moving through your system, and what's the overall impact of all these interventions on housing stability or client well-being measures, etc. So HMIS best practices are very numerous, but unfortunately they're from the U.S. Now, if you want to hear about HMIS implementation in Canada, the examples from Ontario would be the Ottawa HIFIS implementation. I'm not sure anything's been written up on that. In Alberta, you have all of the cities that have roles akin to service managers. They all manage HMISs locally. So there is a provincial system that all these local HMISs feed up into. And so, for instance, shelters, housing first programs, transitional housing, they all report on the same database. And the service manager there, it's called a community-based organization, a CBO, but it's equivalent for our purposes. They see all the data, and they can do system planning based on that information because it's shared with client permissions and with an information privacy impact assessment done, etc. So it meets all the legal obligations, and it includes client consent to share. But the system planner, the CBO, can actually do its work because they have that information at their fingertips. So at any one point, they can tell you, we have X chronically homeless people in our system, and X amount are in the shelter and X amount are moving into housing first programs as we speak. So just being able to have that really critical information and data at your fingertips is really kind of critical to do system planning. Like, you really can't do system planning without information. It's kind of part and parcel of the work. So those would be good examples in Alberta. Where it's documented, I know the Calgary Homeless Foundation, who manages the system in Calgary, has a toolkit for HMIS that's available on the Homeless Hub. So if you're interested in what that looks like and what's involved, that's an example. And I know lots of communities are moving forward with that model of an integrated information system. So I'm working with Victoria right now on this. I know there's communities in Ontario that are looking at expanding HIFIS now that HIFIS 4.0 is available. So having that available in a broader network of services has come up in different areas. So you guys probably know more than I do about that because you're probably dealing with that. The trick with HMIS, and I always say this to myself so I don't forget, is that it's not just for you as a funder. So don't look at it as just a way to get reporting done with your funded agencies. To do system planning, it's regardless of funding stream. So actually ensuring that HMIS is implemented across the board for the system, not for the funder's benefit, for the system's benefit, that's really critical. Otherwise, you're just going to implement yet another database for reporting for what you fund, but forget half the system in the process. So a really good example of that is a community I'm working with right now where HIFIS is looking to expand, but it's in one particular agency. I think it's incorporating 9 beds, but the agency has another 50 emergency shelter beds that are funded by somebody else. So essentially the HIFIS system is only capturing 9 out of 59. So how good is our system planning going to be if we miss most of the emergency shelter beds in the process of implementing? So this just one piece is just to make sure that our funder hat is put to the side when we think about system planning, not to forget about it, but just to make sure that we act on behalf of the system as opposed to just parts of it. So, okay, I'll stop.
What a great answer, and I just learned something there. I was also going to mention that this is a great question, Aja, for our next webinar that we're talking about around shared measurement data. So I'll make sure that I get all of this down and your question, and we can target that webinar to answer some of that. And Oksana has added the homelessness management, the HIMIS link, so that you can check that out as well. So it's on there. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, whenever you start to ask about data or measurement or anything, the questions get really interesting. That was so good. still hoping someone's going to raise their hand just because I want to see it. That's all.
Maybe I will.
Okay.
No,
Someone needs to test it out.
Yeah, I know. We just give another
Melanie.
minute.
Melanie has raised their hand.
Oh, great. You know what the thing is? I don't think I can see it from my access. I don't see their I think you're the only one who can see the raising of the hand.
No question, just a test. Okay. There you go. It works.
Thank you, Melanie. Okay. Anyone else have any more questions? If you want to chat, that's fine. If you'd like to stay on the phone and get into conversation with us, that's great. We've got about 10 minutes, but we can close down too if there aren't any other burning questions. I'll just give it another minute just to let people think about that. Well, I think that's probably it. Seems like there's a little bit of quiet on the line now, so I just want to thank everyone for a wonderful, thought-provoking webinar town hall. Thank our presenters, Alina and Amanda. Oksana, thank you so much for all your work and support through this. You keep holding my hand as I go through this technical stuff. I'd also like to especially again thank our supporters, the Ontario government, Government of Ontario, OMSSA, and of course our away home supporters, and everyone else who's on the line, and all of the service managers who are doing really heavy work in a climate that is full of opportunity but also challenges. And we know that, and we're really committed here at Away Home Canada to supporting the service managers in Ontario, but also all the local governments across the country to get into this work, and community members and the whole group. So thank you so much, everyone, and I just want to say have a wonderful weekend as well, and welcome spring.
And thanks to you, Mary Jane.
My pleasure.
For making all this happen. Awesome.
My pleasure. This is lovely work.
And just one last thing, if there are any questions after the webinar, feel free to post them on the workspace. There is a web link just at the top right of your screen. So if you have any questions, put them on there, and we'll be monitoring that as well. Great.
And these webinars will be, I'll send out the recording to you. It's usually, Oksana is really fast. You usually get it quite quickly. So within another day or two, by Monday, maybe.
Yeah, by Monday for sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. Bye.